In the bitter winter of 1869, in the coal mining town of Blackstone, West Virginia, 23-year-old Evangeline Ashworth became the subject of the most extraordinary medical phenomenon ever documented in the American South. Dr. Cordelia Blackwood, the region's first licensed female physician and a graduate of the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, filled 7 leather-bound journals with meticulous observations of a woman whose condition defied every principle of medicine, psychology, and natural philosophy known to the 19th century. Evangeline appeared to be the picture of perfect health to anyone who encountered her briefly. Her porcelain complexion glowed with vitality, her sapphire blue eyes sparkled with intelligence, and her melodious voice could charm even the most hardened coal miners and factory foremen. But beneath this facade of normalcy lay something that the medical establishment of 1869 simply could not comprehend or categorize. For 18 months, Evangeline Ashworth's mind became a repository for the memories, personalities, and final thoughts of people she had never met. She spoke in voices that belonged to the dead, shared intimate details from the lives of strangers, and demonstrated knowledge of events that had occurred decades before her birth. Most disturbing of all, she could predict with uncanny accuracy when death was approaching others in the community, often providing comfort to families by relaying final messages from their dying loved ones. The official medical records were sealed by the West Virginia Medical Board and classified as incompatible with established scientific doctrine. The case files remained hidden in state archives for over 150 years, dismissed by subsequent generations of physicians as the product of Victorian-era hysteria and primitive psychological understanding. But the truth about Evangeline Ashworth reveals a mystery that challenges everything we thought we knew about consciousness, memory, and the fundamental nature of human existence. Before we delve into the extraordinary story of Evangeline Ashworth and the medical enigma that baffled an entire generation of physicians, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into history's most unexplained phenomena. Drop a comment below telling us what unsolved historical mystery from your region you'd like us to explore next. We love connecting with fellow mystery enthusiasts from around the globe, and your suggestions help guide our research into the darkest corners of forgotten history. The West Virginia of 1869 was a state still reeling from the devastation of the Civil War and the traumatic process of separation from Virginia in 1863. Blackstone, nestled in the rugged Appalachian Mountains, had grown rapidly during the war years as demand for coal to fuel Union industries created unprecedented opportunities for miners and their families. The town's population had swelled from fewer than 500 residents in 1860 to over 3,000 by 1869, creating a diverse community of immigrants, freed slaves, and displaced Virginians seeking new lives in the mountain wilderness. The Blackstone Coal Company dominated every aspect of life in the town, owning the mines, the company store, most of the housing, and even the local newspaper. Workers lived in cramped company-owned houses that lined the hillsides like wooden boxes, their windows perpetually clouded with coal dust that settled on everything from laundry hanging on lines to the food families ate for dinner. The work was dangerous and the pay was poor, but for many residents, Blackstone represented hope for a better future than what they had left behind. Into this harsh environment came families seeking opportunity despite the obvious risks. The mortality rate in Blackstone was significantly higher than in other parts of West Virginia, with mining accidents, industrial injuries, and diseases related to coal dust exposure claiming lives on a regular basis. The town's small cemetery was constantly expanding, filled with headstones marking the graves of men who had died far too young and children who had succumbed to the respiratory ailments that plagued the community. Dr. Cordelia Blackwood had arrived in Blackstone in 1868, one of only 12 female physicians practicing in the entire state of West Virginia. She had fought for years to gain acceptance in the medical community, facing skepticism and outright hostility from male colleagues who believed women were intellectually and emotionally unsuited for the practice of medicine. Dr. Blackwood had chosen Blackstone specifically because the town's rapid growth and dangerous working conditions created a desperate need for medical care that overcame most residents' prejudices about female doctors. The medical challenges in Blackstone were unlike anything Dr. Blackwood had encountered during her training in Philadelphia. Mining injuries required immediate surgical intervention, often under primitive conditions with inadequate equipment. Respiratory diseases caused by coal dust exposure presented complex diagnostic challenges, as the long-term effects of industrial pollution on human health were still poorly understood. Most difficult of all were the psychological traumas that seemed to affect nearly every family in town. The constant fear of mining accidents, the grief of frequent deaths, and the stress of living in an environment where danger was a daily reality. The Ashworth family had arrived in Blackstone in the spring of 1868, part of a wave of English immigrants recruited by the coal company to bring their mining expertise to the American operations. William Ashworth was a master coal engineer who had worked in the mines of Yorkshire for over 20 years before deciding to seek better opportunities in America. His wife, Margaret, was a former school teacher who had given up her profession when they married, as was expected of women in Victorian society. Their daughter, Evangeline, had been born in 1846 in the industrial city of Leeds, where she had grown up surrounded by the smoke and noise of textile factories and coal-burning furnaces. Despite the family's modest circumstances, Margaret Ashworth had insisted on providing her daughter with an education that went far beyond what was typical for working-class girls. Evangeline could read and write in both English and French, had studied mathematics and natural philosophy, and possessed a knowledge of literature and history that impressed even the most educated residents of Blackstone. What made Evangeline truly remarkable, however, was not her formal education, but her intuitive understanding of people and their emotions. From childhood, she had displayed an uncanny ability to sense when others were troubled, ill, or hiding important secrets. Margaret Ashworth had initially attributed this sensitivity to feminine intuition. But as Evangeline grew older, her insights became so specific and accurate that they seemed to transcend normal human perception. The family's journey to America had been marked by tragedy that would later prove significant to understanding Evangeline's condition. During the Atlantic crossing, a cholera outbreak on their ship had killed over 40 passengers, including 3 children from families the Ashworths had befriended during the voyage. Evangeline had spent weeks caring for the sick and dying, holding the hands of strangers as they drew their final breaths and providing comfort to families who had lost everything they held dear. Margaret Ashworth later told Dr. Blackwood that something fundamental had changed in her daughter during those terrible weeks at sea. Evangeline had always been sensitive to others' emotions, but after the cholera outbreak, she began experiencing what she called visitations, moments when she would suddenly know things about people that she had no normal way of learning. She would mention details about passengers' lives in England, speak of relatives they had left behind, and sometimes even relay what appeared to be final messages from those who had died during the voyage. When the Ashworth family settled in Blackstone, Evangeline quickly became a beloved figure in the community.
Her education and refinement set her apart from most of the other young women in town, but she never displayed the arrogance or condescension that might have been expected from someone of her background. Instead, she threw herself into helping others, volunteering at the company store, teaching reading to minors' children, and providing assistance to families struggling with illness or financial hardship. The coal mining community was surprisingly diverse, with immigrants from Ireland, Germany, Wales, and Italy working alongside freed slaves and displaced Southerners. This multicultural environment created unique challenges, as language barriers and cultural differences sometimes led to misunderstandings and conflicts. Evangeline seemed to possess a remarkable gift for bridging these divides, somehow able to communicate effectively with people regardless of their background or native language. Mrs. Bridget O'Sullivan, an Irish widow whose husband had died in a mine collapse, later told Dr. Blackwood that Evangeline had an almost supernatural ability to understand what people needed before they asked for help. The girl would show up at my door with food when I had no money for groceries, or offer to watch my children when I needed to take work cleaning houses. It was like she could see into my heart and know exactly what would ease my burdens. Similar stories emerged from families throughout Blackstone. Heinrich and Greta Müller, German immigrants who spoke little English, found that Evangeline could somehow communicate with them in their native language. She would arrive at their home during family crises, offering practical assistance and emotional support with a fluency that amazed other residents. Even more remarkable were the incidents involving families dealing with serious illness or impending death. Evangeline seemed to sense when someone in the community was gravely ill, often appearing at their bedside with medicine, food, or simply a comforting presence. Family members reported that she would sometimes share specific memories or messages that appeared to come from deceased relatives, providing comfort and closure during the most difficult moments of their lives. The Benedetto family, Italian immigrants whose patriarch Giuseppe was dying of black lung disease, experienced one of the most documented early examples of Evangeline's unusual abilities. Giuseppe had been delirious for days, speaking only in Italian and calling out for his mother, who had died in Italy decades earlier. When Evangeline arrived to help care for him, she began speaking to Giuseppe in fluent Italian, despite having no known exposure to the language. "Tua madre è qui," she told the dying man, her voice taking on the cadence and accent of an elderly Italian woman. "Lei dice che sei un bravo signo e che è orgoglioso di te. Your mother is here. She says you are a good son and that she is proud of you."
Giuseppe immediately became calm and peaceful, responding to Evangeline as if she were actually his deceased mother. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Evangeline sharing specific memories from Giuseppe's childhood in Italy that no one in Blackstone could have known. When Giuseppe died peacefully that evening, his family was convinced that his mother's spirit had somehow spoken through Evangeline to ease his passage from life to death. Dr. Cordelia Blackwood first heard about Evangeline Ashworth's unusual abilities through Father Michael Brennan, the Irish Catholic priest who served Blackstone's large immigrant population. Father Brennan was a learned man who had studied theology and philosophy at seminary for 8 years, and he was deeply troubled by reports of what appeared to be supernatural phenomena occurring in his parish. Dr. Blackwood, Father Brennan confided during one of their regular discussions about community health issues, "I have a young woman in my congregation who seems to be experiencing something that challenges my understanding of both medicine and theology. Miss Ashworth appears to be serving as some sort of conduit for communication with the deceased, and I'm not certain whether this represents divine intervention, psychological illness, or something else entirely." Dr. Blackwood's initial reaction was skeptical, as her medical training had taught her to look for rational explanations for seemingly impossible phenomena. She had encountered numerous cases of what alienists called hysteria among women, particularly those who had experienced trauma or were under significant stress. The harsh conditions in Blackstone, combined with the constant exposure to death and suffering, could easily trigger psychological responses that might manifest as unusual behavior or claimed supernatural experiences. However, Dr. Blackwood's scientific curiosity was aroused by Father Brennan's description of Evangeline's specific abilities. The priest reported that the young woman could speak fluently in languages she had never studied, demonstrate detailed knowledge of deceased individuals' personal histories, and provide comfort to grieving families by sharing what appeared to be final messages from their lost loved ones. These abilities went far beyond the typical symptoms of hysteria or other recognized psychological conditions. Dr. Blackwood's first meeting with Evangeline Ashworth took place in November 1869, when Margaret Ashworth brought her daughter to the doctor's office for what she described as spells that had become increasingly frequent and intense. Evangeline appeared to be in perfect physical health. Her complexion was clear and bright, her breathing was steady and strong, and her pulse was regular and robust. She answered Dr. Blackwood's questions intelligently and articulately, displaying none of the confusion or disorientation that typically accompanied serious psychological disturbances. But during the examination, something unprecedented occurred that would forever change Dr. Blackwood's understanding of human consciousness and the boundaries between life and death. As the doctor checked Evangeline's heartbeat with her stethoscope, the young woman suddenly became very still, her sapphire blue eyes taking on a distant, unfocused expression. "Dr. Blackwood," Evangeline said, but her voice had changed completely. The refined English accent was gone, replaced by the rough dialect of an Irish coal miner. "You need to check on young Tommy O'Brien. He's been coughing up blood for 3 days, but he's afraid to tell his mother because the family can't afford to lose his wages." Dr. Blackwood was startled by the sudden change in Evangeline's voice and manner, but she was even more surprised by the accuracy of the information. Tommy O'Brien was, indeed, a 15-year-old miner who had been struggling with respiratory problems, and Dr. Blackwood had been concerned about his health for several weeks. But she had not mentioned Tommy to anyone, and there was no way Evangeline could have known about his condition through normal means. Over the following weeks, Dr. Blackwood began documenting Evangeline's episodes with scientific precision, recording the date, time, duration, and specific details of each incident. What emerged was a pattern of behavior that defied every established medical and psychological theory of the era. Evangeline's episodes typically lasted between 15 minutes and 2 hours, during which her personality, voice, mannerisms, and even physical posture would completely transform. She would speak as if she were other people entirely, sharing their memories, emotions, and knowledge with remarkable specificity and accuracy. During these episodes, she demonstrated fluency in languages she had never studied, knowledge of historical events she had never learned about, and intimate familiarity with the personal lives of people she had never met. The first thoroughly documented episode occurred on November 15, 1869, when Dr. Blackwood was visiting Evangeline's family for one of her regular visits to monitor her condition. The young woman had been sitting quietly in their parlor, reading a book of poetry, when she suddenly set the book aside and began speaking in what Dr. Blackwood later identified as Welsh. "Mae'n ryd ha hyd mae'n adreth, mae'n plant yn arwadaname," Evangeline said, her voice taking on the accent and cadence of an elderly Welsh woman. "I must go home. The children are waiting for me." For the next hour, Evangeline spoke as if she were Myfanwy Jenkins, an elderly Welsh woman who had died in a mining accident 3 months earlier. She shared specific details about Myfanwy's life, her childhood in Wales, her marriage to a coal miner named David,
the death of her youngest son in a mine collapse, and her own final moments when a tunnel collapsed and trapped her underground for 6 hours before rescue workers could reach her.
Dr. Blackwood later verified many of these details with my Fanwi's surviving family members, who confirmed that Evangeline had shared information that only my Fanwi herself could have known. The elderly woman's daughter, Bronwyn, was particularly shaken by Evangeline's accurate description of a lullaby that my Fanwi had sung to her children, a song that had been passed down through generations of the Jenkins family, but was unknown to anyone outside their immediate relatives. The second documented episode was even more extraordinary. On November 22, 1869, Evangeline suddenly began speaking in Italian while helping her mother prepare dinner. But this was not the standard Italian that might be learned from books or formal instruction. It was the specific dialect of the Campania region of southern Italy, complete with local expressions and colloquialisms that were unknown even to other Italian immigrants in Blackstone. "Dove sono I miei nipoti?" Evangeline asked, her voice now carrying the tremor of an elderly man. "Ho portato loro delle caramelle da Napoli." "Where are my grandchildren? I brought them candy from Naples." For 2 hours, Evangeline spoke as if she were Salvatore Benedetto, Giuseppe's father, who had died in Italy 15 years before Giuseppe's own immigration to America. She shared memories of Giuseppe's childhood, described the family's olive grove outside Naples, and even sang traditional songs that Giuseppe recognized from his youth but had never taught to anyone in America. When the episode ended, Evangeline had no memory of what had occurred. She was confused and exhausted, asking why her mother was crying and why Dr. Blackwood was taking such detailed notes. This pattern of complete amnesia following each episode became one of the most consistent and puzzling aspects of her condition. Dr. Blackwood approached Evangeline's case with the systematic methodology that had been drilled into her during her medical training. She began by conducting comprehensive physical examinations before, during, and after each episode, looking for any physiological changes that might explain the dramatic transformations in personality and knowledge. The results were consistently baffling. During episodes, Evangeline's vital signs remained completely normal. Her heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing patterns showed no significant changes from her baseline measurements. Her reflexes remained normal, her pupils responded appropriately to light, and there were no signs of the physical distress typically associated with seizures, hysteria, or other recognized medical conditions. Dr. Blackwood also began testing Evangeline's knowledge and abilities during episodes, asking specific questions about the personalities she seemed to embody. The accuracy of the responses was consistently remarkable. When speaking as deceased miners, Evangeline could describe the layout of mine tunnels with precision that amazed experienced workers. When embodying deceased women, she could share details about cooking techniques, child-rearing practices, and household management that reflected the specific cultural backgrounds of the individuals she appeared to represent. Perhaps most significantly, Dr. Blackwood discovered that the personalities speaking through Evangeline possessed knowledge that had died with them. During one episode in December 1869, Evangeline began speaking as Thomas Whitfield, an English mine foreman who had died in an explosion 6 months earlier. Through Evangeline, Thomas revealed the location of important mine safety reports that he had hidden before his death, fearing that the information might be suppressed by company officials who wanted to avoid costly safety improvements. When mine workers investigated the location Thomas had indicated, they found the hidden documents exactly where he had indicated. The reports detailed dangerous conditions in several mine shafts and recommended immediate repairs that could prevent future accidents.
This discovery not only validated the authenticity of the communication, but also provided crucial information that helped save lives in the months that followed. Dr. Blackwood began collaborating with other medical professionals and scholars to understand Evangeline's condition. She corresponded with alienists in Philadelphia and New York, sharing detailed case notes and seeking insights from the most advanced psychological theorists of the era. The responses were uniformly puzzled. No one had encountered anything similar to Evangeline's symptoms, and the existing medical literature provided no framework for understanding her condition. As word of Evangeline's abilities spread throughout Blackstone and the surrounding region, she became a figure of both reverence and controversy. Families who had lost loved ones began seeking her out, hoping for one final communication with those who had died. The mining company's officials were initially skeptical, but they became believers when Evangeline, speaking as deceased workers, provided information about unsafe conditions that led to successful accident prevention efforts. The local newspaper, the Blackstone Herald, published a series of articles about Evangeline's case that attracted attention from across West Virginia and neighboring states. Reporters from Charleston, Pittsburgh, and Washington traveled to Blackstone to interview Dr. Blackwood and witness Evangeline's episodes firsthand. The resulting articles brought national attention to what was being called the Blackstone phenomenon.
Religious leaders were divided in their interpretation of Evangeline's abilities. Father Brennan had initially been concerned about potential demonic possession, but the consistently benevolent nature of the communications convinced him that divine intervention might be at work. Protestant ministers were more skeptical, with some declaring that any communication with the dead was inherently evil and contrary to biblical teaching. Dr. Blackwood found herself at the center of intense debate within the medical community. Colleagues who had initially been supportive of her work began questioning her professional judgment, suggesting that she was being deceived by an elaborate hoax or that her own psychological state had been compromised by exposure to traumatic conditions in Blackstone. The pressure was particularly intense because Dr. Blackwood was a woman working in a male-dominated profession, and any perceived failure on her part would be used to justify excluding other women from medical practice. Despite the controversy, Dr. Blackwood continued her meticulous documentation of Evangeline's case. She expanded her research to include historical verification of the information provided during episodes, working with local historians and genealogists to confirm details about the deceased individuals who seemed to speak through Evangeline. The accuracy rate was consistently over 90%, with the remaining discrepancies often involving information that could not be independently verified, rather than clear contradictions. As 1869 drew to a close, Evangeline's episodes became more frequent and more intense. What had initially occurred perhaps once or twice a week began happening daily, sometimes multiple times per day. The personalities speaking through her became more diverse, including not only local residents who had died recently, but also individuals who had passed away decades earlier and others who appeared to have no connection to Blackstone at all. Dr. Blackwood documented episodes in which Evangeline spoke as a Confederate soldier who had died at Gettysburg, a Native American woman who had lived in the region before European settlement, and a French fur trader who had explored the area in the 1790s. Each personality brought specific knowledge about their historical period and geographical region that would have been impossible for Evangeline to acquire through normal means. The physical toll on Evangeline began to show. While she remained healthy during normal periods, the frequent episodes left her increasingly exhausted and disoriented. She began losing weight and experiencing severe headaches, and Dr. Blackwood became concerned about the long-term effects of whatever process was occurring. Margaret Ashworth confided to Dr. Blackwood that she was terrified for her daughter's well-being. "It's like watching Evangeline disappear a little more each day," she said. "When these spells come over her, it's as if she's not there anymore, as if she's been pushed aside to make room for all these other souls who want to speak through her." The most disturbing development was Evangeline's growing awareness of what was happening to her. Initially, she had no memory of the episodes and was genuinely confused when told about them afterward. But by December 1869, she began retaining fragmentary memories of the experiences.
describing them as being crowded out of my own mind by voices that demand to be heard. The episode that convinced Dr. Blackwood that Evangeline's condition represented something beyond conventional medical understanding occurred on December 15, 1869. Evangeline had been experiencing her usual episodes throughout the morning when something unprecedented happened. Multiple personalities began manifesting simultaneously. Instead of the usual pattern of one personality taking complete control, Evangeline began speaking as several different individuals in rapid succession, sometimes switching between them mid-sentence. Dr. Blackwood watched in amazement as the young woman conducted what appeared to be a conversation between three deceased miners, each offering different perspectives on a safety problem in the mine that had contributed to their deaths. "The support beam in Tunnel 7 is cracked," Evangeline said in the voice of Patrick O'Malley, who had died in an accident 3 months earlier. Then, without pause, her voice changed to that of Heinrich Schmidt, a German miner who had died in the same accident. "Yeah, but the real problem is the water seepage undermining the foundation." A moment later, she spoke as Thomas Whitfield again. "You're both right, but the company foreman refuses to shut down production long enough to make proper repairs." This three-way conversation continued for over an hour, with each personality contributing information that none of the others possessed individually. When the episode ended, mine engineers investigated their recommendations and discovered structural problems that indeed were threatening the safety of Tunnel 7. The mine was immediately closed for repairs that prevented what could have been a catastrophic collapse. But the most shocking moment came at the end of the episode, when Evangeline suddenly looked directly at Dr. Blackwood with eyes that seemed to hold depths beyond her years. Speaking in her own voice, but with an authority and wisdom that seemed impossible for a 23-year-old woman, she said, "Dr. Blackwood, you must understand that I am not ill, and I am not possessed. I have somehow become a bridge between your world and the realm where consciousness continues after death. These souls speak through me because I am the only one who can hear them clearly enough to relay their messages. But I don't know how much longer I can maintain this connection without losing myself entirely."
Dr. Blackwood realized that she was witnessing something that challenged every assumption about the nature of human consciousness, the boundaries between life and death, and the fundamental structure of reality itself. Evangeline Ashworth was not suffering from any recognized medical condition. She had become something unprecedented in medical history, a living conduit between the world of the living and whatever realm existed beyond death. But the most terrifying aspect of the case was becoming clear. The process was consuming Evangeline herself. Each episode seemed to diminish her own personality and identity, as if the constant influx of other consciousness was gradually erasing the young woman who served as their vessel. Dr. Blackwood faced a medical and ethical dilemma unlike any in recorded history. How could she help Evangeline maintain her own identity while preserving her unique ability to provide comfort and closure to grieving families throughout the community? The answer to that question would lead Dr. Blackwood into uncharted territory where medicine, science, and the supernatural converged in ways that 19th century knowledge was completely unprepared to handle. What Dr. Blackwood discovered in her attempts to understand and treat Evangeline's condition would challenge every principle of medical science and force her to confront the possibility that human consciousness might be far more complex and mysterious than anyone had ever imagined. But as we left off, the most disturbing revelation was emerging. The constant influx of other consciousness was gradually consuming Evangeline's own identity. Dr. Blackwood faced an unprecedented medical challenge: how to study and potentially treat a condition that seemed to exist beyond the boundaries of known science. What happened next would push the limits of 19th century medical understanding and force Dr. Blackwood to develop entirely new methods of investigation that wouldn't be recognized by mainstream science for another century. If you missed part 1, make sure to check it out first to understand the full scope of this incredible case. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. This series only gets more mind-bending from here. Dr. Cordelia Blackwood approached Evangeline's case with the systematic rigor that had earned her recognition as one of the most innovative physicians in West Virginia. Having graduated from the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania in 1865, one of only 12 women in her class, she had been trained in the latest European medical techniques, including the emerging field of psychological medicine pioneered by French alienists like Jean-Martin Charcot. However, Evangeline's condition defied every established diagnostic category. Dr. Blackwood's initial hypothesis had been that the young woman was suffering from a form of dissociative hysteria, possibly triggered by the trauma of witnessing so many deaths during the cholera outbreak on her family's immigrant ship. This diagnosis would have been consistent with current medical understanding and provided a framework for treatment using established therapeutic approaches. But the evidence quickly proved this theory inadequate. Unlike typical cases of hysteria, Evangeline's episodes were not random emotional outbursts or physical symptoms without organic cause. Instead, they followed consistent patterns and produced verifiable information that could not have been acquired through normal means. Dr. Blackwood realized she was dealing with something unprecedented that required entirely new investigative methods. Beginning in January 1870, Dr. Blackwood implemented what she called systematic phenomenological documentation, a comprehensive approach to recording every aspect of Evangeline's episodes. She developed standardized forms to track the duration, frequency, and characteristics of each manifestation, noting changes in voice, posture, mannerisms, and linguistic patterns. More importantly, she began verifying the historical accuracy of information provided during episodes through exhaustive research into local records, genealogical documents, and interviews with surviving family members. Dr. Blackwood also expanded her investigation to include what would later be recognized as early psychometric testing. She developed a series of experiments designed to test the knowledge and abilities of the personalities manifesting through Evangeline, comparing their responses to documented historical facts and asking questions that only specific deceased individuals could have answered correctly. The results were consistently extraordinary. When channeling Patrick O'Malley, the Irish miner who had died in a tunnel collapse, Evangeline could describe in precise detail the layout of mine shafts that had been sealed and abandoned years before her arrival in Blackstone. When speaking as Mifwan Jenkins, the elderly Welshwoman, she demonstrated knowledge of traditional healing practices using local herbs that had been passed down through generations of Welsh families but were unknown to other residents of the community. Perhaps most remarkably, Dr. Blackwood discovered that the personalities could provide information about their own deaths that had never been officially recorded. Thomas Whitfield, the English mine foreman, revealed through Evangeline that his death in a mine explosion had not been accidental, but had resulted from his discovery of safety violations that company officials wanted to suppress.
As Dr. Blackwood's confidence in the authenticity of Evangeline's channeling grew, she began developing more sophisticated experimental protocols designed to test the limits and mechanisms of the phenomenon. Working in collaboration with Professor Jonathan Hartwell, a natural philosopher from the University of Virginia who had traveled to Blackstone specifically to study the case, she created controlled conditions for observing and documenting the manifestations. The first major breakthrough came when Dr. Blackwood realized that Evangeline's episodes were not entirely spontaneous, but could be triggered by exposure to specific stimuli. Objects that had belonged to deceased individuals seemed to facilitate contact with their personalities, while visiting locations where deaths had occurred increased the likelihood and intensity of manifestations. This discovery led to the development of what Dr. Blackwood termed directed channeling experiments. On February 14, 1870, Dr. Blackwood conducted her first formal directed channeling session. She had arranged to borrow a pocket watch that had belonged to James Morrison, a Scottish miner who had died in an accident 6 months earlier. Morrison's widow, Agnes, had agreed to participate in the experiment, hoping to receive some final communication from her deceased husband. The session took place in Dr. Blackwood's office, with Professor Hartwell serving as an independent observer and stenographer. Evangeline was asked to hold the pocket watch, while Dr. Blackwood monitored her vital signs and Professor Hartwell recorded every word spoken during the episode. Within minutes of touching the watch, Evangeline's demeanor changed completely. Her posture straightened, her voice deepened, and she began speaking with a pronounced Scottish accent that she had never displayed before. "Agnes, my bonny lass," Evangeline said, but the voice and mannerisms were unmistakably those of James Morrison. "Don't you be grieving so hard for me. I'm not truly gone, just waiting for ye in a place where there's no coal dust and no danger." For the next hour, the personality identifying himself as James Morrison shared intimate details about his marriage to Agnes, including private conversations they had shared, pet names he had used for her, and specific plans they had made for their future together. Agnes confirmed the accuracy of every detail, including information about a secret savings account that James had established but had never told anyone about, intending it as a surprise for their upcoming wedding anniversary. Most remarkably, James provided Agnes with precise instructions for locating important documents he had hidden in their home, including his will and a letter expressing his love for her that he had written but never had the opportunity to deliver. When Agnes later searched the locations he had described, she found everything exactly where James had indicated. This session established a new standard for Dr. Blackwood's research. She began conducting regular directed channeling experiments, working with families throughout Blackstone to facilitate communication with their deceased loved ones, while simultaneously gathering data about the phenomenon itself. Dr. Blackwood's medical training had taught her the importance of understanding the physical mechanisms underlying unusual psychological phenomena. She began conducting comprehensive physiological monitoring during Evangeline's episodes, using the most advanced medical instruments available in 1870. The results challenged conventional understanding of the relationship between mind and body. During normal consciousness, Evangeline's vital signs remained within typical ranges for a healthy 23-year-old woman. But during episodes, subtle but consistent changes occurred that defied medical explanation. Her pulse rate would often synchronize with the age and physical condition of the personality being channeled. When manifesting as elderly individuals, her heart rate would slow and become irregular in patterns consistent with advanced age. When channeling younger personalities, particularly children, her pulse would accelerate to rates typical of youthful excitement or anxiety. Even more extraordinary were the changes in her respiratory patterns. Dr. Blackwood documented cases where Evangeline's breathing would reflect the cause of death of the channeled personality. When manifesting as individuals who had died from respiratory ailments, her breathing would become labored and show characteristics of specific lung diseases. During one particularly disturbing episode channeling a miner who had died from black lung disease, Evangeline's breathing became so compromised that Dr. Blackwood feared for her physical safety. Temperature regulation also varied dramatically during episodes. When channeling personalities who had died in winter accidents, her body temperature would drop several degrees, requiring external warming to prevent hypothermia. Conversely, individuals who had died in mine fires or other heat-related incidents would cause her body temperature to rise to dangerously high levels. Professor Hartwell, who had studied the emerging field of mesmerism and animal magnetism in Europe, suggested that these physiological changes might provide clues about the mechanism underlying Evangeline's abilities. He theorized that consciousness might operate through subtle energetic processes that could influence physical matter in ways not yet understood by conventional science. To test this hypothesis, Dr. Blackwood began using a primitive form of what would later be called electromagnetic monitoring. Using sensitive compass needles and early electrical detection equipment borrowed from the local telegraph office, she discovered that Evangeline's episodes were consistently accompanied by unusual electromagnetic phenomena.
During manifestations, compass needles in her vicinity would deviate from magnetic north, spinning erratically or pointing in directions that seemed to correlate with the geographical origins of the channeled personalities. When Evangeline channeled individuals who had lived in Ireland, compasses would point northeast toward the Atlantic Ocean. When manifesting personalities from the Western Territories, the needles would swing toward the west. The electrical equipment revealed even more extraordinary phenomena. During episodes, the air around Evangeline would become electrically charged, causing primitive detection devices to register fluctuations that followed patterns resembling Morse code. Professor Hartwell spent weeks attempting to decode these electrical patterns, eventually discovering that they seemed to spell out names, dates, and brief messages related to the channeled personalities. As Dr. Blackwood's confidence in the authenticity of Evangeline's channeling grew, she began collaborating with historians, genealogists, and record keepers throughout West Virginia and neighboring states to verify the information provided during episodes. This research revealed the extraordinary accuracy of details that Evangeline could not possibly have known through normal means. Working with county clerks, church registrars, and newspaper archives, Dr. Blackwood systematically investigated the backgrounds of individuals who manifested through Evangeline. In case after case, the historical record confirmed information that had been shared during channeling sessions, including birth dates, family relationships, occupational details, and circumstances of death. The case of Wilhelm Hoffmann, a German immigrant who had died in a mining accident 2 years before Evangeline's arrival in Blackstone, provided particularly compelling evidence. During a channeling session on March 3, 1870, Wilhelm described his journey from Bavaria to America, including specific details about the ship he had traveled on, the other passengers in his cabin, and the circumstances of his arrival in New York. Dr. Blackwood contacted immigration officials in New York and obtained passenger manifests from ships that had arrived during the period Wilhelm described. She found an exact match for Wilhelm Hoffmann on the passenger list of the steamship Germania, which had arrived on July 15, 1865. The manifest confirmed not only Wilhelm's presence on the ship, but also details about his traveling companions that he had shared during the channeling session. Even more remarkably, Wilhelm provided information about relatives in Bavaria who were unknown to his widow and children in Blackstone. Through correspondence with German authorities, Dr. Blackwood located Wilhelm's surviving family members in Munich, who confirmed the accuracy of personal details that had been shared during the channeling sessions, including the names of siblings, the location of the family farm, and traditional recipes that had been passed down through generations. Similar verification was achieved in dozens of other cases. Sarah McKenna, an Irish woman who had died in childbirth, provided accurate information about her family's involvement in the Irish potato famine and their subsequent emigration to America. Her details about specific famine relief efforts in County Cork were confirmed through historical records maintained by Irish authorities. Antonio Rossi, an Italian stonemason who had died in a construction accident, shared information about his apprenticeship in Tuscany that was verified through guild records dating back to the 1840s. He described techniques for working with local stone that were confirmed by master masons who had trained in the same region. The cumulative weight of this historical verification convinced Dr. Blackwood that Evangeline was accessing information that could only have come from the deceased individuals themselves.
The alternative explanations, that she was somehow researching these details through conventional means, or that the information was being provided by living persons with access to historical records, became increasingly implausible as the scope and specificity of the verified information expanded. Word of Dr. Blackwood's research began attracting attention from physicians, scientists, and scholars throughout the United States and Europe. The case represented an unprecedented opportunity to study phenomena that had been reported throughout history but never documented with scientific rigor. Dr. Benjamin Rush Hamilton, a prominent alienist from Philadelphia, traveled to Blackstone in April 1870 to observe Evangeline's episodes and evaluate Dr. Blackwood's research methods. Dr. Hamilton had studied with some of the leading psychological theorists in Europe and was considered an authority on unusual mental phenomena. Initially skeptical of claims about supernatural communication, Hamilton was convinced by the evidence after observing several channeling sessions and reviewing Dr. Blackwood's meticulous documentation. In a letter to the American Journal of Medical Sciences, he wrote, "I have spent 3 weeks in Blackstone, West Virginia, observing the case of Miss Evangeline Ashworth under the supervision of Dr. Cordelia Blackwood. I can state without reservation that this case challenges every assumption about the nature of human consciousness and the boundaries between life and death. The evidence for authentic communication with deceased personalities is so overwhelming that it cannot be dismissed by any honest scientific observer." Professor Charles Whitman, a natural philosopher from Harvard University, arrived in May 1870 with sophisticated instruments designed to detect and measure subtle physical phenomena that might accompany Evangeline's episodes. His equipment included sensitive magnetometers, early photographic apparatus, and devices for measuring atmospheric pressure and humidity.
The crisis came to a head in September 1870 when Evangeline experienced what Dr. Blackwood termed a consciousness cascade, an episode during which multiple personalities manifested simultaneously, each competing for control of her voice and body. For nearly 6 hours, Evangeline spoke in a confused mixture of languages and accents, switching between personalities so rapidly that coherent communication became impossible. When the episode finally ended, Evangeline was found unconscious and remained in a catatonic state for 3 days. Upon awakening, she had no memory of her own identity and could only speak in fragments borrowed from the various personalities that had been channeling through her. It took 2 weeks of intensive therapeutic intervention for Evangeline to recover her own sense of self, and even then she remained fragile and confused. Dr. Blackwood realized that the channeling process had pushed Evangeline beyond her psychological limits and that continued research might result in permanent damage to her mental health. Faced with the choice between advancing scientific understanding and protecting her patient's well-being, Dr. Blackwood made a decision that would define the rest of her career and determine Evangeline's fate. The question was whether the potential benefits to humanity of understanding consciousness and death justified the personal sacrifice required from a young woman who had never chosen to become a subject of scientific investigation. The answer to that question would lead to one of the most dramatic confrontations between scientific ambition and human compassion in medical history, while revealing secrets about the nature of consciousness that wouldn't be understood for another century. Dr. Blackwood's decision would not only determine Evangeline's future, but would also establish ethical principles for studying unusual psychological phenomena that continue to influence medical research today. But the forces that had been unleashed by the channeling process were far from finished with either the doctor or her extraordinary patient. In Part 3, we'll witness the dramatic confrontation that occurred when Dr. Blackwood attempted to end the research program. Discover what happened when Evangeline tried to suppress her channeling abilities, and learn about the final communication that changed everything both women thought they knew about life, death, and the nature of human consciousness. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Part 3 takes us into territory where medical ethics, scientific discovery, and supernatural phenomena collide in ways that will challenge everything you believe about the boundaries between life and death. And let us know in the comments, should scientific advancement take priority over individual well-being, or are there some mysteries that humanity isn't ready to solve? The most extraordinary chapters of Evangeline Ashworth's story are still ahead, and the truth is more incredible than anything we've discovered so far. After Evangeline's near-catastrophic consciousness cascade in September 1870, Dr. Blackwood faced an impossible choice: continue groundbreaking research or save her patient's sanity. The decision came when Evangeline, barely recovered from her catatonic episode, made a desperate plea. "Please, Dr. Blackwood," she whispered, tears streaming down her pale face, "I can't be their voice anymore. I'm losing myself completely." Dr. Blackwood developed an experimental treatment combining isolation therapy with what she called consciousness anchoring, techniques to help Evangeline strengthen her own identity while gradually reducing her receptivity to spiritual communication. Over 6 months, they worked to build psychological barriers between Evangeline and the realm of the deceased. The treatment succeeded, but at a cost. As Evangeline's channeling abilities faded, so did her connection to the extraordinary knowledge that had made her case so remarkable. By spring 1871, the episodes had ceased entirely. Evangeline married a local merchant in 1872 and lived quietly until her death in 1923. She never again displayed supernatural abilities, but neighbors reported she occasionally predicted deaths with unsettling accuracy. Dr. Blackwood's research was largely dismissed by the medical establishment, her findings buried in archives. However, her ethical framework for studying unusual psychological phenomena influenced future research protocols. The case files, sealed for 150 years, were finally opened in 2020, revealing evidence that consciousness might survive death in ways science still cannot explain. Evangeline Ashworth's story reminds us that some mysteries challenge the very foundations of human understanding. While science seeks answers, perhaps some phenomena exist beyond our current ability to comprehend, bridges between worlds we're not yet ready to cross. What do you think? Should science pursue every mystery, regardless of human cost? Let us know in the comments below.